On a warm, dusty night in Los Angeles, under a star-scattered sky and the flickering neon glow of the iconic Viper Room, a murmur of panic rippled through the crowd in the fall of 1993. Inside, Johnny Depp, then the club's owner, was on stage, his guitar blazing through the smoky air. But just outside those doors, something terrifying unfolded. River Phoenix, a young actor with eyes the color of autumn rivers, collapsed onto the pavement. He wasn't alone. His girlfriend, Samantha Mathis, stood beside him, paralyzed by fear. A fear that would ripple across the world within hours, as news of the tragedy spread like wildfire. River was born in 1970 in Oregon, as if summoned into the world straight from a hippie dream. His parents believed they could raise children in love, music, and freedom. Even his name wasn't just a name, it was a symbol. They called him River after the river of life in Hermann Hesse's novel Siddhartha, a spiritual guidebook for many in that era. The Phoenix family never stayed in one place. Homes were temporary vans, trailers, dusty motel rooms, moving from sun-drenched California to rain-soaked Florida. Each child was born in a different state, a testament to their nomadic creed that the world belonged to everyone and no one. Their lifestyle was radical. Veganism, rejection of mainstream medicine, a quest for purity through nature, herbs, and prayer. But these ideals weren't just philosophical, they were born from struggle. Life was unstable, unpredictable, and survival was a daily act of faith. As the oldest of 5, River felt the weight of responsibility early on. He realized young that if they were going to make it, he had to perform, not for fame, but for food. He sang with his siblings on street corners, their voices weaving together into rock covers, old hymns, and aching harmonies. Sometimes the crowds grew so large that police had to disperse them. These weren't just performances, they were cries for recognition from children trying to be seen. River never had formal schooling. Life was his classroom, the road his teacher, the silence between guitar chords his meditation. That life held both brilliance and darkness. He would later say his childhood was a desperate one, and art became his salvation. River wasn't just an actor or a musician, he was the soul of a generation. In him, young people saw honesty, vulnerability, beauty, and truth. His younger brother, Joaquin Phoenix, would later carry that torch, but it was River who lit it first. That night in 1993, it all ended. But the legend remained. The boy with the guitar, once hailed as the next James Dean, remained. His gaze, full of both wonder and sorrow, remained. And so did the silence that followed, echoing outside the Viper Room, where all he ever wanted was to be heard. He didn't learn to read from leather-bound books, but from songs, streets, and stray fragments of conversation. River Phoenix grew up without roots, not in culture, not in literature, not in history. His childhood didn't smell of homemade pie or dusty libraries, it smelled of restless roads, the anxiety of constant movement, and the voices of parents forever searching. Not for stability, but for revelation. They were spiritual seekers, hungry for meaning in every corner of the universe. That hunger eventually led them, the whole family, into the grip of an organization called the Children of God. It was 1979. They had been chasing enlightenment, but what they found was something much darker. In Caracas, Venezuela, under swaying palms and the guise of communal harmony, River and his siblings were put to work picking fruit and serving God, or so they were told. But behind the facade of fellowship was something far more sinister. The cult manipulated, broke, and scarred its followers. And River, a wide-eyed little boy, was left vulnerable in the middle of it all. Years later, as an adult, he would say his childhood had been stolen. His first intimate experience wasn't love. It was abuse. He was only 4 years old. Thankfully, his parents woke up before it was too late. Disillusioned by their so-called enlightened community, they gathered their children, their bags, and whatever dreams they had left, and returned to the U.S. In 1977, Los Angeles greeted them with smog and possibility. River's mother found a job as a secretary at NBC. Not glamorous, but it was something solid. And it was near those TV studios that something almost magical happened. The Phoenix kids would sing, raw, honest, full of street spirit, and one day, a woman from the film industry saw something in them. Like something out of a fairy tale, a talent agent signed the entire family. Even among such a gifted group of children, River stood out. It wasn't just that he was beautiful. There was something unmistakably real about him, as if he carried both pain and light in his eyes. His talent didn't feel like performance, he lived every scene. By the age of 10, he was already appearing in commercials for Mitsubishi and Ocean Spray. And that was just the beginning. River didn't just become an actor. He became a voice for his generation. Raw, vulnerable, and heartbreakingly true. By 1980, as the windows of Saks Fifth Avenue sparkled and New York moved to the rhythm of its own quiet elegance, one boy already knew. His path would be different. River Phoenix, thin-framed, with eyes full of quiet defiance, was disappearing more and more often into auditions. Acting wasn't a hobby for him or even a dream. It was a vow. People began to notice him at casting calls, not just for his talent, but for something else, something harder to name. Presence, a flicker of difference. Corey Feldman, his peer and frequent audition room rival, would later recall a friendship tinged with competition. Yes, River was a gifted tap dancer, but it was acting where he truly came alive. His first real role wasn't just a line on a resume, it was an emotional breakthrough. In 1984, he starred in a TV special called Backwards, the riddle of dyslexia, with a young Joaquin, his little brother, appearing briefly by his side. But for River, the part cut deeper. He had struggled with dyslexia since childhood, and the role gave him a voice for that pain. His screen presence, the crack in his voice, the realness of his struggle, it couldn't be ignored. For the first time, people started paying serious attention. Everything changed after Stand By Me. In 1986, at just 16, River found himself at the heart of a cultural moment. Based on a Stephen King novella, the film wasn't just a hit, it became a generational touchstone. And River, he was its heartbeat. One scene, in particular, burned itself into memory. His character, a bruised and weary kid, confiding in a friend about the betrayal of adults. That moment, raw, stripped of all pretense, marked River forever. Director Rob Reiner asked him to dig into his own pain for the scene. River did. He didn't act, he relived. When the cameras stopped, he couldn't stop crying. Took time to bring him back. That wasn't just a role, it was a kind of healing, painful, necessary. And maybe it was that very pain that made his gift so fragile, so real. Later that same year, he starred in The Mosquito Coast, alongside Harrison Ford and Helen Mirren. Director Peter Weir was stunned. He said River had something beyond technique, something not even Laurence Olivier had. It's hard to know what he meant exactly. Maybe it was that unteachable sincerity, that open, aching truth. Somewhere in the sweltering heat of Belize, during those long days of filming, a young love story bloomed. It began with tension. River and his co-star Martha Plimpton didn't get along at first. But then, it became something out of a movie, the kind of love he wouldn't live long enough to play. Their relationship lasted a few years, quiet, luminous, vulnerable. But River wasn't only an actor. He was a believer, in causes, in compassion. He fought for animal rights, was a devoted vegan, and once, according to Plimpton, they set off together on a journey that he was one of those rare boys who seemed to carry an inexplicable depth from the very beginning, as if he'd been born with a soul already weary of the world's noise. Once, in an upscale New York restaurant, beneath the shimmer of crystal chandeliers, she ordered crab. Without a word, he stood up and walked out into the night. She found him blocks away on Park Avenue, alone and in tears. To him, it wasn't just food, it was life taken. That sensitivity, that fragility, was in everything he did. Every choice, every movement, every role. River didn't grow up like other children. While others were still learning to tell fact from fairy tale, he already knew that the world was more complicated and far more painful. By the time he landed his first lead role, he was still a child, tender, impressionable, sheltered by his parents but already exhausted by constant moves. The family changed homes more than 40 times in just 18 years. What he wanted more than anything was silence, a place where he could simply exist. When fame arrived, bright, sudden, like a lightning strike, he didn't lose himself. He turned wealth into generosity. He bought 2 ranches, one in Florida, one in Costa Rica, not for himself but for his family. He wanted them to finally have a home, something real with roots. Film after film followed. When the Mosquito Coast flopped, despite its star-studded cast and big budget, River was shaken. He spoke about it openly in interviews, no pretense, just a quiet ability to look inward. That introspection sometimes led him into dark places, where feelings became so sharp they hurt. But the light in him never dimmed. In Running on Empty, he starred alongside Martha Plimpton, a close friend and kindred spirit. The role earned him an Oscar nomination, making him, at 18, the 6th youngest nominee in Academy history. When the award went to Kevin Kline, River jumped up and applauded with genuine joy. That was who he was, truly kind, truly humble. Not every role came naturally. In Dogfight, he played a Marine, rough, brash, completely unlike him. His co-star, Lily Taylor, later recalled how deeply the role unsettled him. It felt foreign, like every day on set was scraping away a piece of his spirit. He came alive only when portraying outsiders, those who defied the rules, who moved against the current. In 1991, he starred in My Own Private Idaho with Keanu Reeves, one of his most powerful performances. He played a vulnerable, drifting street kid, and the role resonated deeply with audiences. It was a turning point not just for River's career, but for cinema itself. Many credit him with helping queer cinema step into the mainstream. But while his characters were opening doors to honesty on screen, River himself was slowly fading into the shadows. During Idaho, he began experimenting with drugs. Rumors spread. Some said he showed up to set high. Some confirmed it. Others, like director Gus Van Sant, denied it. The truth, as always, lived between the lines. His soul was too delicate for a world so coarse. He felt too deeply, loved too fiercely, suffered too quietly. His life was a pulsing search for belonging, a fight to hold onto the light, even as everything around him began to dim. When drugs entered River Phoenix's life, they didn't arrive as guests. They stormed in like invaders, quietly, insidiously, and with devastating force. Martha Plimpton, the girl who shared his school years and first love, would later recall it as a slow, painful descent into darkness. She begged him to stop. There were tears, arguments, desperate pleas that circled back again and again. But at some point, she realized he didn't want to change. Or maybe he just wasn't ready. And so, heartbroken, she walked away. There was no other choice. River, despite the chaos brewing inside, kept moving forward, across stages, film sets, and a life that still had its moments of light. He lit up the screen as the young Indiana Jones, embodying the role so naturally that George Lucas personally offered him a chance to continue in a TV series. But River turned it down, not out of arrogance, but because he felt television was a step backward. He wanted to evolve, not settle. It was the decision of an actor who knew his worth. But acting was never his deepest passion. His true love was music. He breathed it, lived it, clung to it like a lifeline. His early street performances with his siblings weren't just about earning money for food. They were the first steps toward a dream. He sang, wrote songs, played guitar, and once he became a recognizable face, he started playing live shows in Los Angeles. A movie star who didn't just want to be seen. He wanted to be heard, truly heard. But it wasn't only music that stirred his soul. River was fiercely devoted to life in all its forms. A committed vegan, he became the face of animal rights campaigns, spoke at rallies, and wrote passionate essays in youth magazines, urging his generation to care for the planet. And it wasn't just talk. He backed it up with action, buying 800 acres of rainforest in Costa Rica to keep it safe from destruction. He wanted to save the world, even as his own world quietly fell apart. Behind the image of the perfect teen idol, the activist, the heartthrob, the shining example, was a young man wrestling with a pain he couldn't name. He drank, maybe more than anyone suspected, and he hid it desperately. From the press, his fans, even those closest to him, the image of pure, radiant River meant too much, and it was far too fragile. Then came that night, October 1993. It started with excitement. A night at the Viper Room, a club partly owned by Johnny Depp, where River was set to take the stage with Red Hot Chili Peppers guitarist John Frusciante. The crowd was buzzing. Friends, fans, music, a night full of anticipation. But backstage, a darker story was unfolding. Just days earlier, River and John had gone on a binge, sleepless nights, a haze of substances that blurred the line between thrill and danger. That night, River arrived at the club with his younger brother Joaquin and his girlfriend, Samantha Mathis. At some point, he approached his friend, musician Bob Forrest, and quietly said he wasn't feeling right. He thought he had overdosed. Bob didn't believe it at first. River was still standing, talking, but just in case, he offered to take him home. "I'm feeling better," River said. Then, just seconds later, the tragedy began, sudden and unstoppable. Years later, Samantha would confess she thought he was sober that night. She wanted to believe he was clean. But when he collapsed, she felt a terror she hadn't known before. Something was different. His eyes, his movements, none of it felt like him. It was as if he was already slipping away, and no one saw it until it was too late. That night in Los Angeles felt strange, as if the city itself sensed something was about to break. At the Viper Room, the buzzing hotspot on Sunset Boulevard, the night was alive with music, laughter, and the electric pulse of youth. Among the crowd was River Phoenix. River, the boy with storm-cleared sky eyes, actor, musician, animal rights activist, vegan, and symbol of purity and unfiltered sincerity. He was different. What exactly happened that evening remains hazy. Witnesses remember a scuffle, an argument, a shove, security trying to break it up. Nothing more than a typical nightclub incident, it seemed. But then came the turn. River stepped outside, staggered, and collapsed onto the pavement. His body convulsed, seizing uncontrollably. A frozen crowd formed around him, not sure if he was breathing at all. His sister Rain dropped to the ground, trying to breathe life back into him. His brother Joaquin called 911, his voice cracking. "Please, it's my brother. He's only 23. Not an actor's voice, just a terrified young man whose world was shattering." While sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, death and love fought quietly in that chaotic circle of fear. Doctors at Cedars-Sinai tried everything. They didn't give up. But at 1 a.m., on October 31st, silence took over. River Phoenix, the boy who always seemed too bright for this world, was gone. Just 23. He left behind not just films and songs, but a hollow space that no story has ever truly filled. By morning, people began gathering outside the Viper Room. Not fans, witnesses. They brought candles, flowers, photos. The club shut down for a week. Johnny Depp, the owner and River's close friend, made a quiet vow. Every Halloween, the doors would remain closed in River's memory. It was a soft, dignified tribute. But the media showed no mercy. When the autopsy revealed drugs, the tabloids pounced like vultures. The vegan James Dean, they called him, clean on the outside, dirty underneath. They wrote it with a gleam in their eyes, not exposing a person, but unraveling a myth. Those who truly knew him, director Gus Van Sant, close friends, family, tried to speak honestly. It was a mistake, a tragic one. River wasn't addicted. He wasn't sinking. He simply took one wrong step, and it was the last. That's the cruelest and most human part of this story. After his death, everyone looked for someone to blame. Who gave it to him? Who stood by and said nothing? Fingers pointed in all directions. Journalist Gavin Edwards noted that some accused John Frusciante from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, claiming he handed River the fatal dose. But no one knows for sure. Maybe it wasn't a person at all. Maybe the real culprit was Hollywood, with its golden smile and hollow promises of salvation and fame. And so River disappeared like a flash. Quick, painful, real. He wasn't a saint. He wasn't a statue. He was alive. And maybe that's the most important thing we can remember about him. That night, it all began with a cup. An odd mix whose price turned out to be frighteningly high. No one could have predicted then how quickly everything would come crashing down. The memories of director William Richard, who worked with River Phoenix on the film Jimmy Reardon, carry fragments of someone else's fear. He had heard about a man who was there in that fateful moment but then vanished, as if he dissolved into thin air, hiding, running, fearing arrest. It wasn't until later that William realized it was Franti, one of those shadows that accompanied River's final hours. But no matter how tragically his story ended, there's something more important: how he remains in people's memories. In 2020, standing on stage with an Oscar in hand, Joaquin Phoenix wasn't just speaking about himself. His voice trembled as he recalled his older brother. The world held its breath. When I was 17, he said, my brother wrote a line, "Run to help with love, and the world will follow." This wasn't just a confession. It was a farewell chord, a soft, almost whispering thank you to the one whose brief life had ignited hearts, whose fragility proved stronger than time. That's how River is remembered, not for the ending, but for the glow, for the words that became a legacy, for the love that never faded.